This is Dona Nobis Pacem, which means give us peace. And please sing with us.
Dona nobis pacem, pacem. Dona nobis 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 pacem, pacem. Dona nobis 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 pacem, pacem. Dona nobis pacem. Okay. I assume I stand here, yeah? Okay. Over here. Over here. And I can be picked up okay? Okay. There we go. How's this? It's good? Okay. Well, good morning, everybody in the room. And whatever it is to you out in the world, good afternoon, good evening, and good morning or good night. I want to thank all of you for coming to our youth conference hosted by the Schiller Institute here. We have a good room full of people here, and also to those watching internationally, I thank you. We are at a point where the world can either choose to blow itself up, or it can choose to cooperate with each other in mutual respect for each other's country's sovereignty, but also having mutual development. And so I'm actually optimistic about the future. And one of the reasons why is because of the next person who will be speaking, which will be Helga Zepp-LaRouche. And I don't want to say too much, but her 10-point principle for a new paradigm has inspired me to act and intervene on politicians and to fight for a better future for all. And so I won't take up much more of your time, but I do want to thank you all again for tuning in and for being here with us. And with that, I want to take it away to the founder of the Schiller Institute and an amazing woman, Helga Zepp-LaRouche. So.
Good day, Good afternoon, wherever you are. Actually, I want to join Jose in his or in your optimism, because I think we are in an absolutely revolutionary moment of history. And, there is no better time to be active and alive than if you have such an epochal change as we are experiencing it right now. I just watched live on an internet channel our very own Bob Baker, who just addressed a rally of Dutch farmers in Den Haag. And this was a huge event. It was about, I don't know, some people say 100,000, maybe less, but a lot of people. And what is at stake there is the very existence of 2/3 of Dutch farmers who, by a decree of the government, are supposed to go bankrupt, and they're waging the fight of their life. And Bob Baker was bringing the solidarity greetings from the American farmers together with some Canadian farmers, basically saying that the fight of all of these farmers to produce enough food for a hungry world, it's actually the same. So you will hear more of that. Then I switched channel, and what do I see? I saw a huge demonstration in Paris, which has been going on for the entire week. The French trade union movement, the CGT and others, are pledging that they will only stop if Macron takes back his so-called pension reforms. But it's not about pensions, it's about the future of France, because many people really know that what we are fighting about is the very existence of humanity, because we are at a crossroad, as Jose just said, where either we could blow ourselves up or be blown up better, or we go in the direction of a new paradigm. Can you take this echo away? So, well, I mean, the good news is there is right now, since yesterday, a diplomatic revolution going on in the entire Middle East and Southwest Asia. Now, the term diplomatic revolution, in one sense, is a paradox, because either you have a diplomatic solution or you have a revolution. But in this case, it is the diplomacy which made the revolution. And this is really big, because what happened yesterday is that in China, the foreign policy responsible, he's no longer foreign minister, but he's now in a different position, responsible for foreign policy of China, Wang Yi, announced that through the mediation of China and that Saudi Arabia and Iran are starting diplomatic relations within 2 months. And this changes the entire Middle East. This is not just, I mean, for those of you who have not been following policies in the Southwest Asia, but since Sykes-Picot, this was the infamous treaty in 1916, this region was the cockpit for wars against Russia, for destabilization of Asia, whereby the British and the French at that time would pit the nations of Southwest Asia against each other for manipulation. And, in the recent period, since the coup against the government of Mossadegh in 1953 in Iran, which imposed the Shah, this region has been the playground of so many terrible games. And in the recent period, naturally, it was the so-called humanitarian interventionist wars against Afghanistan, against Iraq, against Syria, the horrible civil war in Yemen was the result, Libya. And this is now ended. Now, this is big through diplomacy. And, this is a sign of the new paradigm of what can happen all over the world. This is a whole package. This is not just Saudi Arabia and Iran, but this involves China. It involves the Belt and Road Initiative. It involves the BRICS countries, the 24 countries who have applied for memberships in the BRICS and therefore a new economic system. It involves the end of the petrodollar and the beginning of a new currency based on completely different principles. And it involves a change in practically every country. Now, Iran, has been punished by the US with very harsh sanctions the whole time. Now, President Putin just got off the phone with President Raisi of Iran. And one of the news part of this deal is that Russia is selling Su-25 fighter jets to Iran. Now that means, given the fact that Russia is extremely concerned that Iran should not develop nuclear weapons like everybody else in the region, without having seen any text or any evidence, my absolute guess would be that Russia would not sell these Su-35 fighter jets to Iran if there would be not an agreement whereby Iran agrees not to build any nuclear weapons, which would be really very important. Now, there has been all the time a fight between the proxy forces of Saudi Arabia and Iran in Lebanon, for example, in Syria, in Yemen. So one can absolutely assume that now where there is peace between these two major countries, that all of these conflicts in Lebanon, in Syria, in Yemen will be solvable. And it's quite conceivable that in the very near future, you could see negotiations between Saudi Arabia and the Houthis in Yemen, and that this horrible war could come to an end. For Saudi Arabia, naturally, it means that they have completely abandoned their loyalty to, or their alliance with the British, loyalty, I don't know, their alliance with the British, all these secret military deals with the BAE, oil for weapons, that may well be on the waste paper dump. And obviously Saudi Arabia is shifting to China because obviously it perceives that China is the winner in this whole game. It's not a game, I'm just saying, in this whole situation. Now that means, for example, Turkey. Turkey also, will probably have negotiations with Syria fairly soon. I think the stay of US troops in Syria, which is illegal and which we were just fighting to get, removed, they cannot stay there when the whole region is moving in a different direction. So the existence of the US troops will be untenable. And, I think this is an absolute example of, how if you have a goodwill and if you have a plan, that you can actually get peace to the entire world. Now, that means also, that the reconstruction of the region can start, because already in 2015, when President Xi Jinping went to Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt, at that time it was a breakthrough visit, and now you see the fruits. That means the Belt and Road Initiative, the new Silk Road, will be extended beyond Iran, beyond Pakistan, for the reconstruction of Afghanistan and for the reconstruction of Syria and Yemen in particular. So I think this is really an absolutely fantastic news. And, I can only say that is an example which can be replicated anywhere if you apply the principle of the Global Security Initiative of China, that's the policy of Xi Jinping, or the global new security and development architecture concept, which the Schiller Institute has been promoting. And I will come back to that because that's the actual point of my whole discussion. Now, for all the people who always say, oh, you can't do anything anyway, the powerful forces are too big. Well, here you have an example. You can change the entire Middle East, just dramatically changed. And that has implication way beyond, because you can be absolutely sure that all the countries of the global south will now look at China as the successful broker of this. And, in one sense, one can say not only is the petrodollar dead, the unipolar world is definitely dead, and the power center in the world has just dramatically shifted. And this is incredible. Now, that means a lot of things will change. One thing which will change is that the role of the dollar as a world reserve currency is no longer, existing because of the weaponization of the dollar, because the US had confiscated 300 billion of Russian assets, 10 billion of the Afghan assets, and many other countries were also victims of such measures. Because of this weaponization, all of these countries have started since quite some time to de-dollarize, meaning that they are doing trade within their national currencies. And, basically because of the sanctions against Russia in particular, Russia and China, and now with the collaboration of many other countries of the global south, have moved to create an alternative currency, which is based on completely different principles than the dollar system was, namely not monetarist principles, but hard commodities. And that is actually a proposal which was made many years ago by my late husband, Lyndon LaRouche, whose policy are being implemented right now to a very large extent. Now, this is really incredibly important because, the whole global south, which was pressured by the United States, by the British, by the EU Commission, by NATO, to condemn Russia for the so-called unprovoked aggression in Ukraine. And they refused. 70% of all countries did not take a position either against Russia, or they kept neutral, or they just refused to sign such a condemnation, basically because in the last year, in the beginning, everybody was surprised and shocked and so forth, and there was a lot of condemnation of Russia in the beginning. But this has shifted. No longer do the countries of the global south buy into this story about the unprovoked war. And they all are looking now at China, and naturally because of the strategic alliance between China and Russia, which was made on the 4th of February 22, this is now the new power constellation. Now, looking at the Ukraine situation, it all looks, and I'm saying this with all care because, because of a lack of real verifiable information from the war zone, it's very difficult to say, but it looks as if, Russia is moving massively ahead and Ukraine is not winning, contrary to all the propaganda. And, there are actually signs that, there may be a change. And don't underestimate, when China proposed its 12-point peace proposal for the Ukraine, which was condemned immediately by Biden, he called it irrational, by von der Leyen, by, Stoltenberg, Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, said, no, he finds this very interesting and he wants to talk to Xi Jinping about it. Now, you can be sure that all the people in Ukraine, even the hardcore military, but especially the people of Ukraine who are being grind up, they are looking at this change in the Middle East and the role of China, and maybe they will have second thoughts about that may be a better solution, that if Ukraine is being developed in the context of the Belt and Road Initiative by building the corridors between Europe and Asia, and Ukraine can be reconstructed rather than being grind up until the last Ukrainian. So this is a very ripe moment. And naturally, the story about the unprovoked war of Russia is really crumbling, because there are now more and more extremely important scholars, diplomats of all kinds, who start to say the story as it was, that it was not unprovoked, that it was the neocon policy, the neocon policy since 91, which was continued. And the aim was to, to not only have regime change in Russia to get rid of Putin, but we are right now producing a documentary, a documentation which shows exactly that the aim is to cut Russia into not 3 pieces, as Brzezinski said, but into 10 pieces. And that explains a lot of why Russia is doing what they are doing. I cannot, unfortunately, go into all the subjects I would like to. Let me just mention two last points. One is Nord Stream. Nord Stream, the story published by Seymour Hersh that it was the United States, and he has given incredible details about, how it was done. And the mainstream media has absolutely blocked it. They did not discuss it for now 6 months. And then after Biden met with Scholz a week ago, where the pressure is building and building, that the truth may come out, they came up with this ridiculous cover story that it was some boat rented in Rostock in the north of Germany, and that 6 people, 2 divers, a captain, 2 aides, and 1 doctor would have planted this sabotage of the Nord Stream pipelines. Nobody in the world believes that. And the thing which is so hair-raising is that the federal state attorney of Germany basically says it was their investigation, and nobody believes it. Now, remember, Watergate, the cover-up was more devastating than the actual crime. So if this thing goes any further, and it will, Russia is now absolutely insisting on an international investigation. It could lead to the collapse of the EU, because if you have Norway making sabotage against Germany and the other countries, and the United States, NATO, what do you need enemies for if you have friends like that? So this is an explosive story, which is very erosive. I don't have time. Daniel didn't give me more time, so I have to be very short. What I want you to do is you have to absorb this incredible strategic situation, and we have to move with the forces of the Schiller Institute internationally in concert with what China is doing, what many other countries of the global south are doing. We have to get the new paradigm on the agenda, because it's very clear that the present security architecture, where NATO is set against Russia for the coming war with China, which some people say will take place no later than 2025, this has to be stopped. And, since World War would eliminate everybody, there would be no life, no human life, and no animal life left on the planet if it would come to a nuclear war. We have to mobilize to get a new security and development architecture, which will allow the survival of all people on this planet. And I think this development in the Middle East is one gigantic step in the right direction. Now, I have written these 10 principles, and you all, or some of you may have read them, and those who have not yet read them, I urge you to do it. This is not the final word for a new security and development architecture, but is a very good attempt to touch upon the principles which are required. And for time reasons, I will only very briefly identify them. The first principle on which such a new security architecture has to be built is the absolute sovereignty of every country, because without which there is no participation of the individual in the governing process. Now, that requires the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence. Secondly, the first task of such an alliance of all sovereign nations of the planet has to be an absolute commitment to eliminate poverty, underdevelopment, and hunger for every human being on this planet. Secondly, there needs to be a prolongation of life. Many people are died too young because of lack of food and medicine. So we need a modern health system in every single country. Third, we need universal education, because the only source of wealth is the creative mind of the individual, and therefore it must be the task of every state to develop the creative powers of every human being in their country and in the world. Then we need naturally a credit system which can finance all of that, which, you know, we have written extensively about how to do that. And we need infrastructure development on every continent, which is why the new Silk Road has to become the world land bridge. But then we need more philosophical principles, because it's not enough to just have programmatic ideas, but you need actually a philosophical foundation, which is why I have said that we need to go to the philosophy of Nicolaus of Cues, because we have to educate people that there is only one humanity and that the one has a higher power than the many. And therefore, we have to learn the thinking in terms of the coincidentia oppositorum, the coincidence of opposites. That's a longer discussion. We can discuss it in the Q&A. And then the next principle is we have to move away from geopolitics. Geopolitics has been the reason for world wars in the 20th century, and we have to replace it with a new security architecture. Then we need to have a way of solving conflict in a scientific way. And the only way how you can do that, to move away from opinion, where everybody says my opinion is as good as yours, you have to go in a direction where we apply the laws of the physical universe to life on the planet in terms of economics, politics, and social policies. And then lastly, we have to assume and proceed from the assumption that the nature of man is that man is innate good, and that all evil comes from a lack of development and therefore can be overcome. Now, these are only very short references. The whole thing is a comprehensive conception, and I would like you to study this and to help us that we put this on the agenda everywhere, because we need a change to a new security and development architecture which implements these points, and that can only be done if we storm the universities, if we get all the think tanks of the world to join in, that we get all moral people on the world to act like world citizens. And I think if we do all of that, I think we are at the most exciting change from a barbaric world order where many, many billions of people are suffering to a world which is truly human. And I'm calling on you to be the absolute active agents to bring about that change.
Thank you, Helga. I'm Daniel Burke with the Schiller Institute. Give me a thumbs up if I'm okay on the screen here. Yeah? Okay. So thank you guys, everyone who came out today in Brooklyn, New York, and thank you everyone who is watching online. This conference is being translated simultaneously into Spanish, and we have people from many different continents who are both participating, contributing, and watching, and this is a process that we want to continue to grow. But thank you again to Helga Zepp-LaRouche, and I'm going to say just briefly for people here, our first panel, we're going to go till about 12:30, or perhaps a little bit after that, and then we're going to break for lunch. And then we have, and there's a couple of places around the area which I'll be able to share with people. And then we'll start up again around 1:30 p.m. We'd like everyone to be in here for a 1:30 start for the second panel, and that will conclude at 4. And both panels will have an opportunity for a question and answer session. We're going to try to get as much of that as we can. We'll take questions from the audience here in Brooklyn, and we'll also take questions from people around the world online. So for the next, our next presenter will be Ashley Tran with the LaRouche Youth Movement. And we're getting her hooked up through Zoom so that she can communicate. And she will be speaking on the 1955 Bandung Conference, the Asia-Africa Conference. and the meaning of that for today and the revival of that spirit today. And while we get that technically set up, otherwise I can share with you that we have contributions today from Syria, from Brazil, from Yemen, from India. We have a very good contribution from India and from other locations. I think this is a good opportunity to have, dialogue amongst the global South is represented. So I'm very happy about that, and I welcome the people who will be contributing and thank them for participating. Oh, Uganda as well, of course, Uganda. So looks like we're ready to go.
Hello. Good morning, everyone. Today I want to talk about a significant historical moment during the Cold War that many people in the West may not be with. I have only been recently aware of this story thanks to the Schiller Institute and its relevance in the context of a second Cold War that we are facing today. And that event is the 1955 Bandung Asian African Conference, the first international independent nations with the goals of initiating cooperation between Asian and African nations to build a new global paradigm based on self-determination and national sovereignty, which had no participation from any Western colonial power. This conference and its goals would ultimately be the foundation for the development of the non-aligned movement. The West's ignorance and ahistorical understanding of this alliance's significance to Cold War history only illuminates the callousness in which we have maneuvered through the past decades to arrive at the disaster that we now face. And the current global geopolitical situation mirrors the volatility of tensions between the West and the Soviet bloc during the Cold War. There is no doubt that if we do not commit ourselves to weathering through the seas of history with the wisdom of the past as our guide, we're bound to crash into the waves of senseless conflict and war that will only bring us to our final demise. It is no exaggeration to say that we are at the brink of a thermonuclear world war, with the rising tensions between the West and Russia and China. 4 days ago, in an address to government advisors representing private business interests during a legislative meeting, Chinese President Xi Jinping explicitly announced in an unprecedented manner that Western countries led by the United States have contained and suppressed us in an all-around way, which has brought unprecedented severe challenges to our development. Like the Cold War, each day we are witnessing unparalleled escalation and provocation from the West. However, we are also witnessing a growing new tendency among Asian, African, and South American countries to not only push back against the Western hegemonic powers, but also increasingly align with each other in defiance to their oligarchical rule. This new tendency is best exemplified with the expansion of the BRICS Plus nations, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and the growth of the Chinese economy over the past decade. In the past year, we have seen BRICS membership explode, with many nations formally applying to join BRICS, such as Iran, Argentina, Algeria, and recently Mexico, while other countries expressing interest in joining, like Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt. It is clear that we're in the midst of a global economic transformation. The rise of China since the 1960s specifically has been a beacon of inspiration for all underdeveloped nations to quickly rise out of poverty without bending a knee to Western hegemonic forces. It has completely elevated not only its own domestic economic capabilities in manufacturing, infrastructure, agriculture, and other industries, but has also been a leader in global economic growth and development through the Belt and Road Initiative projects. The Belt and Road Initiative has especially played a key role in China-Africa cooperation. Since the BRI was proposed in 2013, China has supported the modern infrastructure projects such as railways, roads, ports, dams, industries, and digital connectivity, injecting vitality into Kenya's growth. In less than a decade, Kenya has a brand new 670-kilometer modern standard gauge railway connecting to the port of Mombasa and the inland port of Naivasha, according to a report titled Shared Prosperity, Tracking the Belt and Road Initiative in Kenya in 2021. China has assisted Africa in building the African Union Conference Center, the Addis Ababa Djibouti Railway, the Mombasa Nairobi Railway, and other large-scale infrastructure projects, while also closely conducting with African nations in the fields of science, education, culture, health, and more. These cooperative efforts are the legacy of the spirit of Bandung that were first relayed at the 1955 conference. As we can see, the spirit of Bandung has written the continuation of the countries in the East and the global South into the future of history. With the waning Western NATO influence on the continent, the US does not intend to go out with a fight. Will we have a peaceful transition into the multipolar landscape with the cooperation of America and its NATO allies? Or will the West resist all progression forward in the name of preserving unipolarity? This decision can be answered with the wisdom of the Bandung Conference. The meeting of the Colombo powers, Sri Lanka, formerly known as Ceylon, India, Indonesia, Pakistan, and Myanmar, formerly known as Burma, convened in April and December 1954 in the wake of these newly independent nations, forming the foundation from which the Bandung Conference was born. Despite their differing interests, ideologies, and historical trajectories at the precipice of the Cold War, all were united upon preserving their own sovereignty and self-determination without being at the helm of any dominion again, whether it was the Soviet or Western Bloc. At the Colombo Conference, the participants decided to build an alliance with other Asian and African nations that had faced similar imperial rule. Through their preparations, the 1955 Bandung Conference was born. The Bandung Conference spanned 6 days from April 18th through the 24th, 1955, in Bandung, Indonesia, and was attended by state leaders and high officials from 29 different nations, representing around 1.5 billion people of that region, nearly 2/3 of the world's population. Countries in attendance included Afghanistan, Cambodia, China, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Iraq, Japan, Liberia, Libya, Syria, Yemen, and many others. It is obvious that the Bandung Conference set the precedent for the new geopolitical paradigm that is being born today. Despite their common status as former colonies, the participating countries came from a diverse ideological, economic, and cultural circumstances, ranging from absolute monarchies to popular democratic and communist governments, ranging from nationalist movements to communist movements. The conference's unity and success cannot be attributed to their common history of being formerly colonized, but their ability to reach a consensus on mutual interests and goals, culminated by their final communique. After 2 days of plenary sessions and 5 days of closed-door deliberation within their respective political, economic, and cultural committees, the final communique was adopted. The contents of the final communique included economic cooperation, cultural cooperation, human rights, and self-determination, as well as the adoption of the Declaration on Promotion of World Peace and Cooperation, listing 10 principles in handling international relations. It is no coincidence that the Schiller Institute has adopted our own 10 principles for peace in remembrance of this historical conception of a new global paradigm, recognizing that each country has an equal participation in the prosperity and peace on earth. The spirit of unity between Asian and African people, and now a growing South American people, opposing imperialism and colonialism, struggling for the defense of national independence, world peace, and the promotion of friendship among the peoples, as demonstrated at the conference, is known as the Bandung spirit. The Bandung spirit caused a ripple effect across all countries in those regions. In May 1956, the Indonesian government revoked the agreement between Indonesia and the Netherlands, which, among other things, ensured the domination of foreign companies after their independence. Right after the law was revoked, an agreement between Indonesia and the Netherlands was passed, and Sukarno, the president at the time, started nationalizing Dutch assets in Indonesia. A few months later, Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal in Egypt. Both actions endured reactions from the former colonial powers, but did not stop the national governments from taking further steps. In the early 1960s, a wave of nationalization swept the two continents, which turned the colonial economy on its head. The Asian African Conference gave the leaders of the newly independent states the confidence and support to take on the Western hegemonic powers and drastically restructure the colonial economy. Today, the spirit of Bandung is lost within the Western Hemisphere, which is still dominated by the NATO imperial nations. Their superficial sectarian political groups have been a point of division that has driven us further away from each other domestically and globally. The West is completely separate from the mutual win-win cooperation that is flourishing among the Asian African region and the growing relationship with the South American countries as well. However, it is not too late. The Chinese still remember the Bandung spirit, as well as the African nations through their partnership in the Belt and Road Initiative with China. In order to transition into this new paradigm, which will determine the fate of the world, we must also join in partnership with these countries to build this new paradigm. Will we choose to fight, or will we choose to resist and fight this inevitability, or move forward together? The spirit of Bandung says that we must move together in cooperation.
All right.
This is the first intercontinental conference of colored peoples, so-called colored peoples, in the history of mankind. I am proud that my country is your host. It is a new departure in the history of the world that leaders of Asian and African peoples can meet together in their own countries to discuss and deliberate upon matters of common concern. In spite of diversity that exists among its participants, let this conference be a great success. Yes, there is diversity among us. Who denies it? Small and great nations are represented here, with people professing almost every religion under the sun, Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, Confucianism, Hinduism, Jainism, Sikhism, Zoroastrianism, Shintoism, and others. Almost every political faith we encounter here, democracy, monarchism, theocracy, with innumerable variants, and practically every economic doctrine has its representative in this hall. Marxism, socialism, capitalism, communism, in all their manifold variations and combinations. But again, what harm is in diversity when there is unity in desire? This conference is not to oppose each other. It is a conference of brotherhood.
And as you can see, this was I wanted to share some of the images from the conference. And this is during Sukarno's speech with all of the delegations from the 29 different countries. And this was the Liberian delegation in particular. And we also see the procession of the Bandung conference on the opening day, which was replicated back in 2015 with the meeting of President Xi Jinping and Indonesian President Joko Widodo. And they commemorated that conference by walking through that same street and doing the same procession that was made on the opening day. So I wanted to share some of these images in memory of this conference, and also to bring back the spirit of Bandung to the West, so that more people can realize that we have this infrastructure and we have this capability already to work with all these different nations and to cooperate in a way that brings prosperity across the globe. And we each have an equal opportunity to participate in that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ashley. And Ashley will also be around for the Q&A for anyone who wants to ask any follow-up questions with her. Now, we're going to show a series of videos. I actually was a little bit out of order. So we're going to show a video from our friend Gabriel Ramos in Brazil. And he's going to introduce himself. And then I'll introduce the next video. But I really, please give a round of applause for Gabriel.
Greetings to all participants of today's Schiller Institute Youth Conference. My name is Gabriel Ramos, and I'm a member of the Union of the Socialist Youth, a social movement in Brazil organized by young people all over the country. Nowadays, I fill the role of president in this organization's chapter in my city. There are a lot of challenges, but I believe these challenges present themselves everywhere in the world. Every place will have a different set of problems, but the cause of them are one and the same. Capitalism, as we know it, has failed humanity, and its fundamental drive for the generation and concentration of wealth, it has not only deepened the inequalities inside every country, but it has done so in a global scale in the last 40 years. In these past few decades, we have watched in anguish as the financially unrestricted capitalism of the neoliberalist ideology trampled legislation, labor rights, and national industries all over the world. As a Brazilian, I have watched closely as our national industry fell and gave way to companies that do not wish to produce in our country, but to import finished goods and resell them at a higher price for my people. This is part of a larger and broader problem that affects everyone. As the world is filled with examples of instability, lack of food and health security, I can strongly affirm that the problems of humanity can be solved by the sustainable development of all nations, making every person on the world someone able to achieve their highest potential through a strong education system. Now, Helga's message with her 10 principles of a new international security and development architecture aim to achieve just that. It is a strong statement that the only way we can move forward as a species, but also as the only way we can survive as a species, is banding together and creating that new world order. One not controlled by greed or the needs of one people in detriment of another, but a new world order when the main goal is to make everywhere a better place. Not my or your country, but everyone's country. And in Helga's own words, countries that are perfectly sovereign. I believe this world is possible, and so does my organization. We fight for it every day, and it is already a huge step in that direction, what we are doing here today. Only if we organize ourselves can we bring about this change. And it is initiatives such as the Schiller Institute that can actually make this possible. There are important representatives from every country supporting Helga's 10 principles. And in doing so, we are helping to actively spread her message to more and more people every day. And only when the world recognizes that cooperation is the only way forward, we will be able to achieve our goals. Only when we convince our leaders that this is the only way is when we will have secured our future. So to bring about this world we desire, we must do a few things. Firstly, big tech companies dictate what we perceive as truth online. And so we must create a basis for an international regulatory legislation regarding these companies and the internet as a whole. We will have protected our way to speak with other people, and we will prevent another disaster from happening again, such as what happened here in Brazil and in the US, where ultra-right movements aim to destroy it all. From the environment to people's lives, nothing was safe. And the pandemic showed us the true horrific potential that lies have online. Once the truth has been re-established, we must support every initiative that aims to develop the world as a whole. And we must oust all those who wish to oppress us. So I ask you all to organize yourselves towards this goal and to act in your local communities, spreading this new paradigm, because we are the future of the world.
Thank you, Gabriel. Next up, we have a video from geopolitical analyst and independent journalist S.L. Kanthan of India. Thank you, S.L.
Hi, I'm S.L. Kanthan. To paraphrase Shakespeare, we're living through the best of times and worst of times. It's the best of times because of science, technology, trade, global finance, and an interconnected world. We have the potential to eradicate hunger worldwide. It's not rocket science. Similarly, we can provide electricity and clean water to everyone, create jobs with living wages, and even guarantee housing and healthcare. We did make a lot of progress in those areas. Look at the astronomical improvement in developing nations, especially Asia, over the last 40 years. That's the good news. However, events over the last couple of years portend the worst of times. Globalization and free trade, which propelled the world's economy to new heights, are being reversed. Trade wars and technology wars between the number 1 and number 2 economies, China and the USA, are terrible for the world. New geopolitical blocs, such as the Quad and AUKUS, are threatening to bring devastating wars to Asia once again. Western media, military generals, and politicians are talking about a war with China as if it's a foregone conclusion. Sadly, even a global pandemic didn't slow down the US attempts to contain China. Then there is Russia's invasion of Ukraine, brought about by expansion of NATO and cynical provocations by the West. This war has brought the world to a brink of a nuclear Armageddon. Do we really want to revert back to the days of Iron Curtain and Cold War? Developing nations where 80% of the world's population lives will be adversely affected by geopolitical chaos. Take, for example, India, which is still a low middle income country. Hundreds of millions of people still don't have access to clean water at home. 1/3 of Indian children are malnourished, and the labor force participation rate is only 40%. For India to leverage its demographic dividend, i.e. the vast pool of young people, it must urbanize rapidly and create hundreds of millions of new jobs. The World Bank estimates that India must spend whopping $1 trillion on urban infrastructure alone over the next 2 decades. To achieve its developmental goals, India must avoid the imperialist trap of divide and rule. India should embrace strategic autonomy and avoid getting caught in great power conflict. There's an Indian saying, Vasudeva Kudumbakam, which translates to the world is one family. Needless to say, that world includes China and even Pakistan. Some people say that India cannot work with China unless the border issues are resolved first. But I say the opposite is true. Work with China on trade, infrastructure, manufacturing, etc., and the emerging goodwill will help resolve the border issues. As a member of BRICS and SCO, India has a lot of potential to work with China to create a peaceful, multipolar world. India should join the Belt and Road Initiative to accelerate Asian and Eurasian integration. India's future will depend on energy from Russia and the Middle East. India's future customers will be mostly in Europe and Asia. And India's manufacturing will rely upon foreign direct investments and even technological expertise of Chinese firms. Madam Helga Zepp-LaRouche has talked about the 10 principles of a new security and development architecture. This is a great blueprint for India's domestic and foreign policies. However, this new paradigm is not just for India. In a highly interconnected world, the fate of one country or a region affects everyone. Thus, the global community must share a common vision and work together as a family. Thank you.
Thank you very much, SL. SL will be joining us on the Q&A period as well, so he'll be a part of the dialogue from India. At this point, for the people who are watching all over the world and in in the United States, I want to ask you, make sure that you like the stream, make sure you share it with everyone that you can, text it around to your friends, and please make a contribution to the Schiller Institute. We need recurring members. If you can go to the Schiller Institute website and donate, or you can, of course, you can contribute $10, $25, $50 a month. It makes a huge difference because we're able to put on events like these and more, and we will be doing a lot more of this. So the next period, the next phase of our panel here is going to have a specific focus, and that is Syria. People here, I see people I know who have been working on things like the pushing the effort to remove US troops from Syria and to end the sanctions, the vicious Caesar sanctions on Syria. And so we're going to have a report from a Syrian journalist, Majid Fahd, and he lives in Syria, which is about a 5-minute oral report, and some of it didn't make it into the video, so I'm going to read that transcript. And then we're going to have a presentation from our member Sam Nettnin on the reconstruction, the optimistic future for Syria that we have to bring about. So I hope you really enjoy this and can share these presentations with the people that you work with and that you know. Are we ready to show that video? Thank you so much.
Hello, yes, you copy? This is Majd.
Majd, very good to meet you. Thank you for joining us. Please go right ahead. We're relying on you for some update on the situation within Syria. And please go ahead and take your time.
Thank you for offering me this great opportunity to speak a little bit about what's going on in my country and what the impacts of the US and the EU sanctions are. First of all countries must step up their efforts to lift the economic blockade on my nation. The sanctions are like wrecking balls scribbling the country. Literally, we are suffering an unimaginable lack of fuel, including heating diesel, gasoline, cooking gas, and even engine oil. The United States and the European Armed Alliance of the NATO are busy delivering billions of dollars in heavy weapons to keep the war raging in Ukraine, but can't muster any humanitarian aid for Syria. Do you know that most of the people here are touching trash to get warm? Do you know why? Because the illegal presence of the US military bases in the Syrian provinces of Deir ez-Zor, Al-Hasaka, and Al-Raqqa halted the nation's necessities of life because most of the Syrian natural resources are there. The Syrian Arab News Agency and local sources have been always reporting the US oil trafficking operations from their bases through illegal border crossings to Iraq. Damascus imports its raw fuel from Iran, and that requires a large amount of US dollars. I am personally suffering from the sanctions. I am literally struggling to secure the basics of living, as I'm responsible for 2 families. Also, the health sector is greatly deteriorating. A short while ago, the Syrian Ministry of Foreign Affairs released a statement strongly denouncing the US Bureau of Industry and Security of the Department of Commerce for targeting the health sector by imposing restrictions on permitting the sale of necessary equipment and on the provision of spare parts to the public and private hospitals. Do you know that the situation of quake-affected Syrians living in shelters is unavailable? The risk of disease outbreaks is a major concern alongside people's physical and mental well-being. Well, the Syrian economy right now is in real disaster. I am not exaggerating, but according to the World Bank estimates, earthquakes caused $5.1 billion in damage, while the stricken country's gross domestic product is nearly $5.4 billion. The current value of damaged and destroyed buildings and infrastructures is estimated at some 10% of Syria's GDP. Aleppo alone suffered an estimated 45% of total damages from the quake. And yes, the Syrian people struggle to secure the basic needs of food. Do you know that most people here are unable to buy chicken products due to their exorbitantly high prices, and a large number of poultry farms have been shut down in northern Syria as a result of the devastating earthquake that struck the country recently? Do you know that if you have a car, you can only fill 25 liters of state subsidized gasoline every 15 days because the government is unable to procure sufficient quantities? Did you know that if you need surgery, you may need to sell something you own, such as gold or diamonds? In some critical cases, you may even need to sell your car because of high expenses.
Pardon me while I continue with the transcript. And you can see this was from a Twitter space that we did that Jose Vega was the host of. I encourage you to follow Mr. Fahd on Twitter. Here's the conclusion. Lately, I was discussing this matter with my friends. I told them that people worldwide should launch huge demonstrations against the wretched Congress-approved Caesar law in several countries, including and highly recommended in the USA, to get enough media coverage. In return and for its part, the Syrian government must facilitate the entry of foreign journalists to document the consequences of the sanctions, which directly and adversely affect average people. There's another option. In Arabic culture, we use a popular proverb that says, diamonds cut diamonds. It means that the only way to get rid of the US occupation in Syria, if all activities such as worldwide demonstrations and any political settlement went into a dead end, is to fight them back. Maybe we can't inflict many losses to the illegal forces, but intensifying the direct fire over their heads will definitely make them feel fear. We need each US soldier operating in Syria to understand that it's not your land. You are not welcome on this soil because it's not yours. You are an invader, occupier, and a thief above all. They deployed you here to save their stolen oil resources. Combating ISIS is a big lie the US deluded the world with. Why don't we see materials from the US military? Why don't we see pictures or videos about the US military's alleged anti-ISIS raids? What are you doing in Syria then? Finally, I just want to say that what Syrians have endured during the war, the mountains cannot bear. Okay, next we will have my friend Sam Nettnin. So come right on up. Thank you, everyone. And do you need anything?
I don't. I'm all right. Okay. Yes. Thank you. Hello. What we see here is a courtyard in a typical kind of antiquated house in the old city of Damascus. And you'll always have a fountain in the center, at least one sitting alcove. And we can get to the next slide, please.
Sam, would you speak up just a little bit?
Yes, and so they'll be quite lushly planted as well. So you could find citrus trees, lavender, perhaps an almond tree that, you know, this time of year would be blossoming quite joyously. Next one. And you know, if you were to visit the old city of Damascus, you'd probably encounter a number of these places. The exterior is nondescript intentionally, but many of them have been turned into restaurants and cafes and small hotels. But do bring cash, because the sanctions prevent you from using the ATM or a credit card. And so if we can get the next slide, please. Okay. So Syria is quite a diverse place. It's some cities like Aleppo and Damascus are some of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world, and it has a great diversity in culture and religion, and a real apparent continuity across civilizations. So I think this really flies in the face of the perspective of a class of civilizations of people like Bernard Lewis or Samuel Huntington. And prior to the war that broke out there in 2011, Syria had some real modern advanced industrial ambitions. For example, the development and construction of an industrial city just outside of Aleppo called Sheikh Najjar Industrial City, which the construction began in the year 2000. And by 2009, there had been 413 different firms operating in this city across diverse sectors like textile development, textile manufacturing, engineering, and so on. And the next slide, please. And you see the picture here of before. But there was heavy fighting between so-called rebel forces and our government army that really rendered Sheikh Najjar Industrial City a little more than a ghost town. And there were some, quite unsavory groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda that were employed, in the warfare against Syria. And the next slide, please. You see here an example. We see Jake Sullivan, who was emailing Hillary Clinton an email that was generously made public for our use, where he says that Al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria, which, okay, the next slide, please. So, for reconstruction to take place meaningfully in Syria, a lot of resources have to be mobilized. And so, to fully mobilize the domestic resources, you have to implement a Hamiltonian system of credit. That is to say, to use a domestic infrastructure bank or treasury to strategically allocate credit to the domestic firms to fully employ people and resources, and but a lot more investment will be required. I think the estimates were in the scale of hundreds of billions of dollars, the reconstruction costs of Syria. So we can go to the next slide, please. And you can see this. So Sheikh Najjar Industrial City that I mentioned, and the area around Aleppo and some other areas like Palmyra, were liberated in the year 2016. And so there was some significant reconstruction carried out on the Sheikh Najjar Industrial City. You see 600 facilities now resuming production, mainly textile industry, but also engineering facilities and also chemical and food production. So if we do the next slide, please. And we see a textile plant in operation there in Sheikh Najjar. And one more, please. Another photo. Okay. And so could we advance further, please? And one more. Okay, so this is the physical map of Syria. You see Aleppo is up there in the north, and then Damascus, the capital, further down in the south. And these are the two largest cities. We have the population centers. Many of them are in the west of the country, which are, follows the historical north-south trading routes. We also have some population centers along the Mediterranean coast and the east and the Euphrates River. Where the U.S. military is currently occupying is in the far east, in the northeast, which I believe was mentioned, Al-Hasaka, which bears the oil field. The area that is being occupied here is Al-Tanf, which is at the border with Iraq and Jordan, and is not a whole lot there, but it has a strategic location because of the U.S. occupation of the Damascus-Baghdad highway. That's and you see Aleppo, the Arabic name is Halab, which is in Arabic it means milk. And it has this name because there's a story of Abraham having a flock of sheep in the mountain of Aleppo, and he would share the milk with the needy and destitute people of that area. So this retained that name. Let's see. And so if we can advance one more slide, and you see, we could see Syria's location here regionally. And, you know, this is where I think it gets interesting because before this war that was launched in 2011, Syria had embarked on a plan of, it was called the 5 Cs plan. And that was to serve as a hub particularly for energy transportation from places like Iraq and Iran and the Gulf to other places, you know, to Turkey and further afield into Europe, and to really use its strategic location with the, you know, Mediterranean, Black Sea, Caspian Sea, Persian Gulf, and Red Seas. And starting in this plan was announced in 2004. And starting in 2004, Bashar al-Assad had embarked on a kind of preliminary infrastructure development plan to develop the infrastructure in Syria to, you know, be able to accommodate its future planned status as that transportation hub. And Bashar al-Assad was the first president to make an official visit to Turkey in 2004. In 2007, with Turkey, a free trade agreement was signed, and a visa-free travel agreement was also signed. And many other countries were visited during this planning stages, especially in 2009 and 2010. Al-Assad and, you know, with a, you know, delegation, Syrian delegation in tow, virtually crisscrossed the Black Sea, meeting many different countries and reaching agreements with people with like Romania, reaching agreements. There was a free trade agreement reached with Iran. There was a free trade agreement. I think there was a agreement made with Azerbaijan. And interestingly, there was a free trade agreement reached in December of 2010 with Ukraine in a meeting with Viktor Yanukovych. And Viktor Yanukovych, after signing that deal, had said that, you know, Syria was now Ukraine's gateway to, you know, West Asia, to the whole region. And, you know, with this and with having, you know, a secular government and having a real diversity in Syria that I mentioned is kind of refutes the, you know, clash of civilizations, geopolitical ideas. You could see perhaps why Syria, you know, began to come under attack. Can we go to the next slide, please? So in the, you know, the main obstacles to that 5 Cs vision was, at that time before the war, so, you know, 2004 to 2010, had been securing a substantial amount of foreign investments and ensuring regional stability. But in the last decade, a lot has changed in the world. We have the real cementing and establishment and what continues to grow of the BRICS alliance. The announcements of China with the Silk Belt and Road Initiative. Thank you. And Asian infrastructure investment banks. And so what's used to be the problem of not having substantial foreign investment now is no longer the case. What now is the main obstacle to Syrian development is simply political obstacles, namely sanctions and so on. And so as you saw, Syria began to rebuild, but the Syrian, the Caesar sanctions, the name that they were given in the Congress was the Caesar Civilian Protection Act of 2019, which is rather oxymoronic. And so it came into force in 2020. It came into effect. And so that's really arrested any type of growth and development, and it's plunged Syrian people over 90% into poverty. But how could Syria rebuild, and how could this 5Cs vision can be reconstituted now, and with increased verve, because Syria can join this east-west trade corridor here, what's bringing about the old Silk Road and building connections between Latakia, Aleppo, onwards to Baghdad and to Tehran, and then reconstituting the ancient north-south trade routes. Syria, and the regional name for the Eastern Mediterranean in Arabic is Bilad Asham, which means the left-hand country, left-hand territory. Does that mean everyone in Syria is left-handed? No, it's contrary to the right-hand territory, which is El Yemen. And so from the perspective of people on the Arabian Peninsula here facing east, you would have the left-hand country, which is now Syria, and the right-hand country of Yemen. So it didn't, Yemen retained this name, but after the Sykes-Picot, secret agreement to really divide and the Eastern Mediterranean, that's what's given us our modern political borders. And so, Syria can be integrated as well as a crossroads into Africa. The Saudis and the Egyptians had come to an agreement to build a bridge along the Tran Strait. And so that is very promising. The Suez Canal was expanded, and that now allows for very large ships to be to traverse the Suez Canal in constant two-way traffic. So the port cities, the ports of Latakia and can be expanded to match that. And so what, is this type of development merely a, building infrastructure to move things from A to B? The next slide, please. LaRouche organization promotes this idea of developing a development corridor, which would really do like a complete development with implementing the proper electrical and industrial infrastructure to really proliferate and augment existing cities and even create new ones to support even higher relative population density. So, it's the, can I get to the next slide, please? Oh, right, yes. So, it's the responsibility now of the world citizen to stand in opposition to the type of political constraints that prevent this type of construction and development from happening, to relegate the ideas of supremacy and hegemony to history, and to usher in a new age of a real prosperity and development in cooperation with other countries, with cooperation with others, for the whole world's prosperity and peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam Nettnin. That was really very valuable. So we are running a little bit late, typical. We may have to move some things around, but I'd like to make sure that we get in one more of the video submissions, and then I'd like to make sure that we get to Q&A so that people have a chance to speak with Helga LaRouche and with other people who have been here. And if you're watching online, you can send questions in by email. And now I realize I'm slightly unprepared. I believe that the email address, I'm going to confirm so I don't have to correct myself. Yeah, here we go. The email address is questions@schillerinstitute.org. The email address is questions@schillerinstitute.org for anyone who's watching online. Anyway, so expect that we're going to go after this to our Q&A period. And then we're going to have a chock full second panel. Lots of really very exciting presentations, especially on science and technology. And as sort of a preview of that, in a certain sense, I want to include this video from a contribution from Bonny Omara, who is one of the lead engineers on the first space satellite of Uganda, which is called the PearlSat. Or Pearl Africa Sat 1. And so I'll give you a chance to hear from him.
Hi, everyone. My name is Engineer Bonny Omara from Uganda, one of the three cohort engineers who designed, built, and tested Uganda's first satellites in collaboration with Kyushu Institute of Technology, Japan. Apparently, I am based in Uganda, and I am leading a group of engineers who are participating in APRI's pilot competition in BIRDS X satellite project. I am here to provide my opinion on the questions that has been asked by my colleague right over here. And one of the questions is, will the next 100 years be an African century, and why? I would give it a 50-50 chance. And this is because when you look at the African Union's Agenda 2063, it outlines an outer space program that aims to foster an environment in which Africa will obtain its share of the use of the global common, which includes the outer space program. Related, the African space strategy seeks to transform Africa's resources-based economies into knowledge-based economies, and the strategic objectives of these reforms include accessing space services, developing regional and international markets, adopting good governance, promoting international cooperation, and coordinating the Africa's space arena. Now, when the African leaders increase the design, the development, manufacture, and the use of, then the 100 years to be probably for Africans. However, most of these reforms appear good on paper than actualized because of the predicaments that exist within the African leaders. I believe you know some of them. I would like to get to the next question. That is, what is the future of African space science? Well, space science world over has brought a fundamental change in critical spheres of human life, such as in communication, food security, disaster management, health, education, and transport and provision of goods and services. Meanwhile, African countries have engaged in related collaboration with various foreign countries. For example, China, France, Japan, Russia, amongst others, to build and design their satellite. Whereas such partnership foster knowledge sharing and also very much appreciated under its rightful terms and conditions. They are also having objectionable consequences such as dependency syndromes, talk about political interferences by those foreign superpowers. Now, when you look at the report from the World Economic Forum, it states that Africans' use of Earth observation satellite will increase from 1.32 billion in 2019 to 1.8 billion by 2024. Yet, data from 2019 found that African engineers had built only 40% of the then 35 African satellites, and not all of them had been built on African soil. Therefore, significant efforts must be made to multiply ownership or to increase the ownership of the African-built satellites. Furthermore, according to the Engineering for Sustainable Development Report 2021, Africa has the lowest number of engineering professionals per capita world over. Imagine that. Therefore, doubling or even tripling the number of engineering graduates over the next few decades would be a determining factor in advancement of satellite sector in Africa. In conclusion, the future of African space program is still uncertain unless African leaders institute strong measures against the brain drain, and then two, having a strong recommendation in developing a strong workforce and also infrastructure within Africa. I would like to thank you for listening, and I request to take my leave. Thank you so much. Enjoy your time. See you next time. All right.
Thank you, Bonny Omara. Bonny would have liked to join us today for the Q&A, but he's under the weather. So I'd like to, it's about 11:40, and we have about 50 minutes for discussion. We're going to stop right at 12:30 because we really need you back at 1:30 to start the second panel. So I'm going to look to Dave to see when we might be prepared for that, but allow me to explain to some of the people who will be joining us. We will have, I believe, S.L. Kanthan from India on. So he's available to discuss these things, and I invite you, S.L. and others who are on Zoom, excuse me, to raise your own comments and questions, discuss with Helga and other members of this this conference. Of course, Sam is going to be available to answer any questions on his presentation. Ashley is on with us by video, Ashley Tran from Texas, to discuss her presentation on the Bandung conference. And then, we're all here. So, and I'd hoped to have Gabriel Ramos on from Brazil, but it looks like he's not able to be on today. So, and then in like that. Oh, and also Jose, excuse me, Jose Vega, who of course introduced this and has been making huge waves. He is here also to join the discussion. So I'd like people who are here sitting to take an opportunity to think for a moment. If you have a provocative question, if you disagree with what's been discussed, by all means bring it up. If you'd like to learn more about a specific area of the discussion today, please do. Or otherwise. And people who are watching live, go to questions@schillerinstitute.org with your email questions. Please send those in. And then finally, let me remind people, please like and share the live stream. We have, I think, around 150 people watching this live at the moment. Many more will watch it after the fact. And I want you all to please become recurring members of the Schiller Institute. Give funds to help us to be able to spread this kind of activity and this message. Oh, and finally, as Helga comes onto the screen, let me say, you can read the 10 Principles document written by Helga Zepp-LaRouche at schillerinstitute.com. It's one of the lead banners, and I invite you all to do that. We also have it here at the event in leaflet form, and this is what we are promulgating. So here's Helga back. Hello, Helga. You can hear us now, Helga, right?
Yes, now I can hear you.
Okay, very good. All right, so the floor is open. Oh, pardon me. Let me follow our typical structure here. Helga, we have a question lined up for you, but if you would like to make any comments about the proceedings so far, please go ahead.
No, I'm very encouraged about all the contributions, because I think if the young generation takes on the fight for the end of colonialism in the so-called advanced sector, then, the two revolutionary tendencies, which is the peace demonstrations in Europe and in the United States, and the fight by the developing countries, which is actually the same fight, if these two forces unite, we can actually win. So I'm very happy about this.
And thank you everyone for your patience with our technical issues. Okay, so we have a question right here in front of me, and since it's right in front of me, I'm just going to take out the microphone and give it over. And please introduce yourself.
Hello, my name's Gordon. I have a question I'm a university student in New York. I have a question it's mostly for SL Kanthan, but I suppose anyone can answer it. It's so at the end of World War II, both China and India were both similar economically. In fact, China was in the middle of a civil war that had lasted decades, so arguably it was worse off. However, today I think it's inarguable that China is becoming a much wealthier society. More than 50% of all the world's steel is made in China. Their agricultural sector is more advanced, and extreme poverty has been totally eliminated in China. However, the same hasn't been true for India. Why has China become wealthier while India has not enjoyed the same degree of success? What institutions have failed in India and which ones have succeeded in China? Is this view correct in the first place?
Thank you very much, Gordon. Was that audible by people who were listening online?
Yes.
Good. Go right ahead then, SL. Thank you.
Okay. This is a very good question, and I have written many articles on this. And the bottom line is there's no simple answer. Like if you look at, for example, if you just go back 30 years to 1992, the GDP per capita, if you compare the two countries, then India was actually ahead of China. So what China did in the last 30 years, they've made all the difference. They basically they looked at the Asian tigers like Japan, South Korea, but Taiwan, etc. And they learned a lot. They said, okay, so we need to get foreign direct investments. We need to focus on manufacturing, and then to do that, so we have to have the infrastructure in terms of the electricity, transportation, and we have to migrate millions of workers from the villages to the cities, and for that we have to build brand new cities. So there are like 50 things you have to do, right? So you have to do the urbanization, manufacturing, the FDI, the infrastructure, and you had to educate the people. So it's like a very, holistic strategy. And they did that very well. And, a lot of people are surprised to know that these things, they work well in, as at least in China's case, socialism, right? Like where there was a very good partnership between the public and the private. But however, what happened in India was people got so enamored by, the neoliberalism. Oh, so well, let's have the free market. Let's focus on services. We can just skip the manufacturing process, and we can just go straight from the agricultural country to service-oriented society or the economy. So, basically, the neoliberalism, it sort of is the main reason for the backwardness of India, because it made a very few people rich. Like if you look at the Gini, the coefficient, so like in India, the 1%, they own like 40 to 50% of the wealth. So that I would say is the summary, is basically not focusing on manufacturing, we're not focusing on the industrialization, the infrastructure, and those things. So did that help?
Yes, that thank you very much. Yeah, it sounds like there's a very brief follow-up question, and then I'd love to hear your view on it.
Would you say that the reason why India has made these decisions and China has chosen the better decisions is because of a flaw in India's institutions? What is the root of this issue? Is it simply bad decision-making by leaders, or is it something deeper?
So there was sort of the amazing thing about China is that they believed in their system, right? So in the 1980s, the U.S. sent all the top economists to China, and they all told them, well, listen, you have to get rid of this socialism. It's not going to work. It has already failed. The future is about free market. But for some reason, the Chinese leaders, they just stuck to their, the convictions. But in India, we just got so carried away by this free market ideology.
Thank you. Helga, would you like to respond?
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add is that, the change in China came after the end of the Cultural Revolution, when the Gang of Four got basically ousted and Deng Xiaoping made the reform and opening policy, which was a 180-degree reversal. And Deng Xiaoping actually studied very consciously all the successful economists like Friedrich List, for example, who's a famous German economist, who's now the most known foreign economist in China. And naturally, when the WTO was offered to China, as the previous speaker was saying, the West was counting that China would adopt the neoliberal Western democracy as a model, but they just took the parts from the economic opening, which enabled them to have the direct investment participation in the global market, but did not go for the liberal epistemology. They went back to their 5,000-year-old Chinese tradition, Confucianism, and basically the whole idea of China as being a civilizational state. Now, India, and I would like to just say, is really right now intending to remedy some of the problems. And, one of the big problems actually is the caste system, which makes a real economic process very difficult. And, but India is not to be discounted at all, because they are now becoming the largest country in terms of number of people, and also the influence of the IT sector is very significant. In any case, I think that the remnants of the British Empire in India are still a factor. I mean, when I was in India, I was always very surprised that despite the fact that Indian colonialism, British colonialism had really damaged India tremendously, that there was still a certain softness on the British Empire, which I think accounts in part for the difference. So get rid of the British Empire.
Okay, the floor is open for any further questions. Please, why don't you come up to the front? We're having people who are watching aren't able to hear the applause, and I want to make sure they get a little bit better sense of what's going on here. Thank you so much. And please introduce yourself.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Shanoy, and I kind of wrote something down. I'm from Jamaica, and I heard that you said that China proposed a 12-point peace plan, right? But what about their silent invasion of the Caribbean and even countries in Africa, right? So I wrote that small Black countries such as the one in the Caribbean, an example is Jamaica, where I'm from, they're almost fully taken over the country's resource industry, right? I'm very nervous, I'm sorry. They're able to come to my country and build businesses, and they get tax breaks for that. They build roads and other infrastructure. But no one sees the persecution of the people. No one sees what the people have to go through. For example, they built a hotel and they told Jamaicans that we can't use the hotel. So in turn, Jamaicans burnt the hotel down. So I'm saying, like, what's kind of peace when China is not doing anything like to help other countries? They just want to take over small Black countries. So I'm kind of confused.
Thank you. Why don't you stay up here, and that way, if there's any follow-up, you can have a chance to speak again. Helga, would you like to answer that?
Well, I don't know the specifics about the situation in Jamaica. I will try to fill that gap. But in general, I can only say that is not at all what is Chinese foreign policy. I mean, if you look at Africa, for example, the only country which has made significant progress in terms of building infrastructure, building industrial parks, building water management was China. And the argument that China created a debt trap is just not true. If you look at the division of the debt of African nation, I think 80% of the debt is to the countries of the Paris Club. And China has been extremely favorable and generous in terms of debt relief. So I'm not exactly sure what these examples are you are mentioning, but I can only say if you would take the Chinese economy out of the present world economy, we would be in a much, much deeper depression than we are. China has done a civilizational work which is unprecedented by lifting 850 million people of its own population out of severe poverty. And I can tell you the poverty in China was very severe in the 70s because at that time it was on a sub-Saharan level of development. And now you have a very strong middle class, you have the eradication of extreme poverty everywhere. And the aim is to get rid of all poverty in even the most remote rural areas in the next period. And the Chinese model of development has brought benefit to every single country where it cooperated with. So, as I said, I have not looked at the Jamaica situation, and I will definitely remedy that. But if you would take the motor of the Chinese economy out of the world economy, we would be in a complete dark age. So I would like you to consider that.
And I'd like to also ask Ashley if you could please make a response. Ashley, in her presentation, she commented on relationship between China and Africa. Are you available, Ashley?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm available. Yeah. I would like to, in addressing this question, I don't think that there aren't any issues between or problems that may come up between the African nations and their people and the Chinese leadership and their people. There have been these instances between people where there is a cultural difference, there is a cultural miscommunication that occurs. But if we're looking at the actual relationship between the two countries, and especially how they go about forming relationships, it's completely different from, say, the Jamaican-US relationship and how their policies are formed. There was actually an interview with this one Jamaican leader that I don't remember his name right now, but he discussed the difference between how China conducts their relationship with Jamaica versus the US. And he said that with the US, Jamaica can protest and be against whatever the US policy or the US deal that is being dealt with currently. But if Jamaica were to say no, that's when the US intelligence community, the CIA, the FBI comes and forces Jamaica in agreement with with the current deal that the US is trying to present to Jamaica. But in the case of China, there is a completely different relationship that is developed. So China can present a deal to Jamaica, and if Jamaica says no, then China goes back to the drawing board essentially and presents a new proposal that is based through the diplomacy and negotiations between the two countries. So even there's no doubt that there are issues that the people face and that the cultural differences and miscommunication that can occur when two completely different countries come together. But if we're looking at how the relationship is developed in the first place and what it is based off of is clearly not the same. as how the West conducts the relationship with African nations and Jamaica. So I hope that answers your question.
I think, there's much more to be said about the Caribbean and China, but I would ask, may I put you in touch with Ashley? It sounds like she knows something about it, and then you guys could have a follow-up conversation. Would that be okay, Ashley?
Yeah.
And I know Helga is interested in hearing from people. I'm going to open up for the next set of questions. I'd love to hear from everyone. I'm really looking, especially for anyone who is student or youth. First, I want to make sure you guys have a chance to speak. You, sir, Jamie, and then we'll go to Jeremiah thereafter. And I also want to tell Simon Miller, who should be on the Zoom, to be prepared to pose, to make any comment or question or anything else that you'd like to contribute. And Jose, I'd really like you to get up here before 12:30 and be able to make your own response or comment.
Hey, I'm Jamie Gray. I guess I might have a question for Sam, since he gave a lecture about Syria. I'm kind of perplexed about the Syria situation because it seems like a military victory in the eastern oil-rich regions could kind of solve all the other problems in terms of like sanction circumvention. Like if they had their own oil to sell, then they could start, use that money to like rebuild after the earthquakes and all that stuff. So I'm kind of just perplexed, like, why is it so hard to win in the East? Obviously, like, there's like CIA craziness going on, and but like maybe Russia could help. Obviously, the Ukraine situation makes that more difficult. Maybe Iran could help. Like, I just would like to see some kind of resolution in Syria. So if anybody knows any like geopolitical stuff.
Thank you very much, Jamie. Sam, why don't you come on up? We'll hear from Sam if you'd like to. There may be a chance for follow-up. Go right ahead.
Yes. So the U.S. occupation force in the east of Syria does occupy a really strategic area with, as you said, the oil and wheat resources. And, it's only a few hundred troops, and, perhaps would not be impossible to vanquish a few hundred troops. But I think many people are very careful not to embark on that to kind of, escalate situation. I think something to keep, the whole idea, West Asia has been a geopolitical playground for the last century. And with the strategy to like sow chaos and so I don't know, the vital resources in East Syria are being occupied, but eventually there will be a political solution. So if to attack those people would just escalate things, and it would play into the hand of geopolitics, sowing even more chaos, even more destruction. And so probably there would be a more meaningful way for Syria to develop soon. But we need to ensure that political opposition is done away with for Syria's development.
Would you also share with the audience what you identified yesterday from the Chinese Foreign Ministry?
So the Chinese Foreign Ministry had announced publicly and directly saying that the U.S. should withdraw its troops from Syria and should eliminate the sanctions that are really suffocating the Syrian people and Syrian economy, and to stop exacerbating such a humanitarian disaster. And they just said so directly to the U.S.
Thank you very much, Sam. Thank you, Jamie. Let's continue with questions then. I'm going to make sure we get to people. I know I wanted to hear from Jeremiah, but if there's a continuation on Syria, let's do that. And then, is it okay if I delay you a little bit? I'm going to get you in there, okay? Okay, I'm going to get you in there. Come on up, Benjamin. And then we'll go to Nuruddin.
Yeah, I heard that
Speak a little bit closer to the thing.
Syria has a lot of different groups, maybe as much as 5 different groups fighting, and they have a lot of very different viewpoints about what they want. And I don't think they're going to give up easily. It seems like this has been going on for a long time. Is it possible that maybe a good solution could be to allow Syria to be divided up so that each group gets part of Syria?
Thank you for that question. Thank you, Benjamin. So why don't we, is your question also on the topic? Okay, then we'll come back to that. So why don't we give Helga a chance to respond? And then I have 1, 2, 3 questions I'm going to go to thereafter. Helga, if you'd like to make any contribution.
Well, I mean, the basic idea of the Schiller Institute is peace through development. And, you know, if you look at the situation, you know, where the population in Syria has been already, you know, before the earthquake, more than 90% of people in extreme poverty due to the sanctions. You know, when you have such scarcity, you know, then the fight is always very fierce. But let's assume that, you know, and I'm actually very optimistic about this diplomatic breakthrough, because both on the US troops, that may not come tomorrow and maybe not the day after tomorrow, but in the medium term or short term to medium term, I think the position of the US troops in Syria is untenable. The supply lines, if everybody else is working in a certain direction, you know, the US troops will be completely isolated. And, you know, I think that that is going to be apparent fairly soon. The same thing goes for different groups being in conflict. The overall dynamic, I mean, the thing which is so good about the new Silk Road becomes the World Land Bridge, or the idea of the Belt and Road Initiative becoming a global development program, is that sometimes when you have a local conflict where you don't find an answer because of historic, ethnic, religious, cultural conflicts, you cannot solve it. But if you look at the whole Southwest Asia as a whole, you have Russia, China, India, Iran, Pakistan, then in the bridging to Africa, Egypt, the Gulf states, now Saudi Arabia, if Turkey, if all of these countries are moving in the direction of being participants in the Belt and Road Initiative development program, then the whole dynamic changes. And that has been our conception from the very beginning, because, you know, many times if you have conflicts between Germany and France, or Korea and China, you cannot solve it because the emotions are deep. A lot of blood has been spent in wars and conflict, and you cannot solve it. But if you think about that, we are moving to a new paradigm where the whole dynamic will be dominated by the BRICS, the BRICS Plus. The BRICS Plus will be, right now there are 24 countries who have applied for full membership in the BRICS. And there will be many projects which are beyond, you know, crossing borders, infrastructure projects which bring development to all the neighbors. So once you have such a dynamic, then that is what changes the situation. So, you know, I think that it's very important to start with a plan where you want to go, and then, you know, get everybody participating, and that way you can resolve conflicts which otherwise look completely unsolvable. So I think I can only say, you know, I think the implication of that breakthrough, which was announced yesterday, may not show tomorrow, but they will for sure show over the next weeks and months.
And then I'm going to go to Nuruddin, and I won't forget Jeremiah.
Yes, hello. I have a question for the
Syrian presentation. Could you elaborate more about the economic corridors heading through Syria, either proposed or at some point existing? That you showed a map earlier with, you got a little bit into it, but you didn't explain in how map represented, and I'm very curious about this.
Yeah, so these would represent proposed economic corridors that would have to be built. And so the exciting thing is that for the presentation, I read through many proposals and memoranda of understanding that between states, state-owned industries, private industries, to do much construction of things of this, some of the infrastructure that would require this. And there's really more proposals than you could shake a stick at. So I think that's what's the most exciting thing. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Perhaps maybe we need to do an in-depth video in addition to your presentation that we can share with people. Okay, Nuruddin, please come on up and introduce yourself.
Okay. Hey, my name is Nasri Nuruddin. I'm from Algeria, and I have just here an.
Please go ahead, but make sure you speak up. So
Yeah, I have an article here about the African Union headquarter building, and this is a French newspaper that made investigation published by French newspaper Le Monde. China, which also paid and built the computer network at the AU, allegedly inserted a backdoor that allowed it to transfer data. The hack wasn't detected until January 2017, when technicians noticed that between midnight and 2 a.m. every night there was a peak of in data usage, even though the building was empty. After investigating, it was found that continental organizations confidential data was being put and on to serve in Shanghai. So my question is China is I know they are building a lot of infrastructure in Africa, but I think they are taking advantage, and they are and there are too many corrupted Chinese company that they are working with too many dictators in Africa. For Algeria, there is a scandal of the East-West highway that was built by corrupted Chinese company, and it cost almost $20 billion. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so more on China from this standpoint. Who would like to comment? SL, of course, you're invited to comment, and obviously we want to hear from Helga as well, or I'd like to hear from Helga.
Sure. As I just would like to say, there's a lot of, so first of all, when you have with two countries with the disparate amount of power and wealth, so the weaker country, they have to be very careful, so it's just, human nature. Right. So, but that said, there's also a lot of, propaganda from the U.S. The U.S. actually spends about $500 million a year just spreading the anti-China propaganda. All right. So, and people just believe, about things and the accusations without having a solid the proof. Right. If somebody says, China has, the concentration camps, and they do this, they do that. I mean, it's just like, pure, the atrocity propaganda, and you have, the weather balloons, and people just freak out saying, oh yes, this is the Chinese spy balloon. And if there is a Chinese student or a scientist, they become a spy automatically, So, but a lot of these accusations, we have to take it with like a huge handful of salt. So that's all I have to say.
I would just point out what SL referred to, $500 million a year. The U.S. Congress approved to put out propaganda attacking the Belt and Road Initiative. And our friend Hussein Askari has written a lot about this. And I would ask you, how many $100 million a year is the U.S. committing to infrastructure in these countries? Oddly enough, they want $500 million a year to say that the Belt and Road Initiative is bad. And I have a feeling that some of these intelligence agencies might have a relationship to Le Monde. I'll just say that. Go ahead, please, Helga.
Yeah, I think that one can never exclude that there is corruption. I mean, that's if you start to discuss corruption in Germany, for example, or in France, in the United States, I mean, there are some pretty heavy cases, like the Meadows scandal and many other, which are never really investigated. I mean, the German chancellor is involved in a scandal where he can't remember anything. Anyway, all I'm saying is these things do happen, and Xi Jinping is, has taken some major steps in an anti-corruption campaign, and he's very rigorous about that. That has been blamed on him. Now people say he's an autocrat, he's going against corruption. Whatever they do, they can make it right. I think you have to really look at the bottom line. The bottom line is which country is devoted to the common good of its own people and to the increase of the living standard of other people. And I think right now we have to think that there is not a gigantic freak out about what is happening right now. I mean, Xi Jinping has offered many, many times to the Obama administration, to Trump, and even to Biden, a special relationship of great power collaboration. China has offered many times to the United States, to European countries, to cooperate. I mean, the problems of the world are so big. I mean, you have 2 billion people who have no clean water. You have about the same number of people who are always on starvation level. It would make so much sense that all the countries work together and overcome geopolitics rather than having this kind of warfare. And, I really think that the whole question of the humanity of where will mankind go will be the question, do we get people in the West, institutions in the West, in Europe and in the United States to give up geopolitics? What China is offering is a win-win cooperation model. And, I think there are some diplomats in the United States who are reasonable, like Chess Freeman, who is the former ambassador to Saudi Arabia, and he was the person who translated for Nixon when he first went to China in 1972. Chess Freeman was the translator in terms of Chinese English. So he's very well familiar with all of these things. And he made a point which I completely agree with. He said, let the Chinese build railways, let the Chinese build airports, and let's put an American locomotive on that railway, or let's put an American plane in that airport. And that way we can collaborate. I think we have to really think in terms of joint ventures and not think, the whole point about my 10 principles, we have to overcome to think in terms of conflict of nations or groups of nations being in a geopolitical confrontation with each other. And I think the new paradigm, which we absolutely have to get at, if we want to have no nuclear war, we have to think about the one humanity first. Patriotism is extremely important, but a patriot should never pursue an interest which is against the interest of humanity as a whole. And that's very difficult because, most people are not used to think in the new paradigm. But, at least in the United States and in Europe, people are not used to think a completely different mode of cooperation among nations. But, I think what Ashley was referring to with the spirit of Bandung, that is what is absolutely increasing in many developing countries who have understood that you can only overcome colonialism, when you really make that mental jump. Think the one which is of a higher quality than the many, and then you can make the many or the other or the specific fit the dynamic of the one going in a completely different way. I think it's a way of thinking which prevents us from understanding that.
So we're coming towards the end of our Q&A period. I really thank everyone who commented and made questions so far. I want to make sure to hear from Jeremiah. I want to make sure to hear from Jose, from Jason. I know that Simon was having some difficulties technically, so I think we won't be hearing from him. And then we'll go to a wrap up and we'll give SL a chance to make a final comment, and we'll give Helga a chance to make a final comment. And so we should be wrapping up within about 10 to 15 minutes. Okay, everyone? So Jeremiah, please come on up.
Yeah, my name is Jeremiah Bagambo. I'm actually from a country called German Southwest Africa, today known as Namibia. So my understanding, and I don't know whether I'm going to pose a question or just something. It happened, we are still under colonialism since it goes for 137 years, I reckon, since they took over, since the German took over Namibia. We heard of Treaty of Versailles in 1918 when they wanted to give back the colonies. They put in policies that Namibia will be given back to the natives Namibians. So there was crimes that was committed there against humanity. So against the tribe called Hereros and Namas. Meanwhile, they knew that they committed these crimes. They didn't give Namibia back to the rightful owners because they said they needed to be educated to be given the right that back. That never happened, and they give this land back to the Dutch, what you call the Afrikaners. After the Afrikaners, they put the same system, give it again to the different tribe, a black tribe from Angola that don't know nothing about Namibia, so to run and control Namibia. So my thing is, Treaty of Versailles failed, League of Nations failed. All what the League of Nations did in 1926, they incorporated a land called Ovambo land into Namibia. So that's where they brought in another part called Caprivi, another part called Kavango, in order to know that they want to cover up all these crimes that was committed by the Germans in Namibia, to make sure that none of should be holdable. So my thinking and understanding, we all this country, we talk of development. What development are we going to bring with these state captured? None of our people are running their own. all of these leaders that we have are all rubber stamps, especially the African leaders. They are all sellouts to their people. They are not representing their people. None of our resources that are there, are benefiting those people that were born there. That's a problem we have. And sorry for being too long, but I understand that we really do need free, we want to be free. If we really say we want to free and bring up true freedom to African, we are not free. And you need to understand, because there was a genocide that happened in 1994. And Namibia is at the edge of everybody's fuming, because I'm here and I got people on the ground, how they talk and how things are going. People really want changes, and we need the international community and to understand that we as Namibian, we have the betrayal of international transition. So we want your help. We want to also for you to understand that United Nations have failed and these organizations are all failing. So face the truth if we really, thank you. Sorry for being long.
Good.
Okay, so I would like to, thank you. I'd like to hear from Jose, Jason, and then we will recap.
I actually want to take a moment to address that we have some organizers and people who were at the Rage Against the War Machine rally that we held on February 19th. And for our international audience who may not know what that was, this was an event that happened on February 19th, where 3,000 American citizens came together. And this was a coalition of left and right and anybody from every walk of political life, libertarians, communists, socialists. It was a beautiful thing. And so I just want to say that, what makes us so dangerous, the Schiller Institute, is that we're able to, first of all, unite with people that we may not agree with on everything, but also we don't only know how to fight, we know what a proper solution is. And if you'll bear with me for a second, I want to introduce you to one method of thinking. I promise this will only take 60 seconds. Edgar Poe had this dialogue called The Power of Words, and it's a dialogue between two people who are in the afterlife, heaven, and one person says to the other, hey man, I thought when I got here I would know everything. I thought I would have infinite knowledge and wisdom. And the guy says, no. You would be in hell if that was the case, because whoever knows everything, well, he is the most miserable person, because happiness is not in the discovery, it's in the process of making the discovery. That is happiness. But then the guy says, well, doesn't God know everything? And then the guy responds, maybe that's the one thing God himself doesn't know. Does God know if he knows everything? I don't know. It's a question for him. But then they start talking about well, then what is the nature of man and stuff. And so the guy goes into his monologue and he says, look, when you move your hand like this, you make an impress upon every particle around the world. And not only once, forever. It will forever rotate around the globe and around the world. And he says that scientists are also able to trace, if you have a sphere of water and it's still, and then you touch it, scientists can trace where that origin point was, where that first point was, right? Like a pond, a still pond, you throw a rock, you can trace where that water came from, right? And so just all motion, on the very nature of it being motion, creates. And the source of all motion is thought. This is the dialogue they're having. And then they say, well, where does thought come from? And then they say, God, the Almighty, the All-Knowing. And so they're having this long dialogue about motion and particles. And then they say, now, didn't it occur to you, and speaking about motion and particles, that words also have some power, that words are also an impress upon the air? that words have some power too. So if our motion already engirdles the whole world forever, what kind of power do our words have too? And so in bringing this to all of you, I just want to say that, we have the power as human beings and creative individuals to choose our words to create a long-lasting, infinite impact that is in constant dialogue with the past and the future. And we have an intention, we can choose the intention as to what we want that to be. We can be like the neocons and the globalists who want to destroy that, but our ability for the good is much greater and outweighs the ripples of negativity. And so I'm just presenting that to everyone here and to the organizers, because everything we do is already ringing and resonating throughout time for fight for the future. So take these ideas, run with them, and that's all I want to say. So yeah.
Thank you, and thank you very much to everyone who's joining us from Rage Against the War Machine. Pardon me. And Jason, come on up, please.
Hi, I'm Jason Ross. I'm here representing the LaRouche organization today. I wanted to address one of these issues that comes up with China relations around the world. Keeping in mind what Ashley had pointed out, that frictions are inevitable when different cultures collaborate, and also recalling, excuse me, Chinese people and businesses don't necessarily represent the Chinese government, and that like any country, I'm sure there are shady Chinese people and shady Chinese businessmen. That doesn't, be careful about overgeneralizing that. What most of this stuff comes from is a lens where countries feel that they have to choose between the West, the US, and China. And that is the most dangerous and evil part of all of this, because outside of that paradigm, instead of people saying, well, look, these countries are forced to get loans from Africa. These countries are forced to get loans from China. They become beholden to China. Well, where's the US Export-Import Bank supporting US firms investing more? Where is the support for that? So I think that the countries in the region, so I can speak, I was speaking with the former African Union ambassador to the US, and she said, we don't want to choose. We want to work with Chinese and Americans. We would like to work with Americans, but the head of the World Bank pointed to one of the biggest potential infrastructure projects in Africa, the Grand Inga Dam, an enormous hydroelectric potential on the Congo River, 40,000 megawatts. This is enough energy for tens of millions of people. It's phenomenal. This is something, in his view, could only be built with China and US both being involved in it due to its scale and due to the challenges it presents. So our job, we're here, we're in the United States, and we're all necessarily Americans, but a job for the United States is for the US to talk about which side people are going to choose, but to be part of the new paradigm. And that's going to also really open up the potential in these areas to now say, there isn't just one game in town, and it would be better if there are more options. Also because it means more good will get done.
Thank you for that, Jason Ross. So I would like to bring us to the conclusion of this dialogue period. Thank you, all of the speakers. Thank you, everyone here in the audience. Thank you, everyone who's been watching online. And the conclusion will be, I want to give SL a chance to make some concluding remarks, and then we'll hear from Helga to finish it. So SL, please go ahead. Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. Let me, pardon me, SL. There's one more thing here. Gabriel Ramos communicated with me that he is on the Zoom. Can you confirm that, Dave? And SL, why don't you go ahead and Gabriel, if you're available and you can somehow make yourself known on the Zoom chat or something like that, then we'll give you a chance to speak right after SL. So please go ahead, SL. Thank you so much for participating.
Okay, but thanks, Daniel. So basically, we are in the midst of a radical transformation of the world, and that's the rise of a multipolar world. and the dramatic geopolitical and geoeconomic changes that we are witnessing are not going to be reversed. So we have to reimagine a new world and a new paradigm where there's no superpower, there are no geopolitical blocks, and there are no perpetual wars, right? And that's going to be a new concept for us. So the focus has to be that everybody works together, and we are going to focus on the development, right? I mean, it should be based on the infrastructure, the connectivity. What do we do to eradicate poverty and hunger, and scientific development, and so on. And in this, the paradigm, it's going to be a very decentralized world, you know? So for example, like if you look at the Fortune 500 firms, so right now only 1/4 are in the US. And if you look at patents and scientific papers, China is number one. So the big powers will still be the US on one end, Europe in the middle, and the Asian countries on the right side. And then the future will also be the development of the African countries, and but that needs a lot of the infrastructure development, and we all have to work together. You know, whether it's but China or the World Bank, IMF, they all have to get together and not focus on blaming one another, right? So we have to create a new security architecture and the development architecture, as Madame LaRouche has talked about. So, you know, that's the big picture. And the big question is, but can we do it? But can we all get together as one small world people and make it happen?
Thank you very much. Is Gabriel available? Gabriel, we'd love to hear a brief comment from you in Brazil.
Hello to everyone, the Schiller Conference. My name is Gabriel Ramos. I'd like to comment on the subject, the coalition of forces regarding sustainable development. What we are doing here in Brazil with Lula's new government is exactly that. We're aiming to not only end the violence, the political violence that has ravaged our country, but we are aiming to, with this coalition of left and right and center movements, to develop Brazil once again. And what the president is doing in these past few months is also traveling the world, talking about peace in Ukraine, development with the Belt and Road Initiative. And I believe this is the way forward. Well, everything I heard today has led me to believe that we are every step, another step closer to that objective. And I'm very happy to hear that we Brazilians can count on so many people towards this goal. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gabriel. Okay, Helga, please tell us how you're thinking about it.
Well, first of all, let me support what Jeremiah had said about the desire and intention of the countries of Africa, including Namibia, to end colonialism. I mean, that is really the demand of the hour, because, I mean, if you think that, how could people in the West think for so long that it is natural that, you know, only 1 billion people live well, and then several billion are living in absolute poverty, only 1 meal a day, or having shorter lifespan just because they don't have access to medicine. I mean, that's not the natural condition of humanity. And we are now at the very exciting moment that, you know, the forces are coming together to really make a world order which allows the well-being of all people on this planet. And what if you have an open mind and a good heart and a beautiful soul, which you should develop if you don't have it yet, work with that, help us to work this, to make this world a more livable world, because it's now the historic moment which, you know, normally history moves and nothing happens for decades and decades, but we are now at a change which is bigger than the wall come down in Berlin in '89. It's bigger than the Soviet Union disintegrating. We are really at an epochal change. And I recently saw a little video where the president of Namibia had a dialogue with the former president of the German parliament, Norbert Lammert. Actually, you should look at it, because it's really very telling of the spirit of the time, where Lammert starts to say, you know, and you should watch out for the Chinese, what they are doing in Africa. Blah, blah. So then the president of Namibia says, hey, wait a second, you know, when you Germans are coming to Africa, all you know to talk about is the Chinese. The Chinese should not do that. We should not talk to the Chinese. When the Chinese are coming, they never talk about the Germans. They come here to develop the country. So I think this is, and I saw similar videos coming from many leaders of the global South. There is this spirit of Bandung, which is completely alive. So I just want to say, as a food for thought, you know, when we are talking about the new paradigm, the new one, which is of a higher order than the many, I mean, we are not the coincidence of opposites. It's not a consensus. It's not the smallest common denominator among opposing parties. That is not what it is. The human mind is capable of always conceptualizing a higher level on which the conflicts do not anymore exist, which arose at the lower level. I mean, Einstein said a similar thing. He said, do not expect to solve a problem on the level where the problem appeared. It is the unique capability of the human mind to think in a dynamic way, a higher order of development in which the conflict is resolved. And it is that change in the method of thinking which is required if we want to solve the problem. And I think since we are human beings and we are capable of creative reason, I'm very optimistic that we are on the verge of a most beautiful renaissance, because if we start to be not so prejudiced and think everybody is also smart and knows everything already, but that we learn from the other cultures, that we learn how, you know, different parts of the world have, you know, solved problems in different ways, made different pieces of art, have come up with different philosophies. And if we exchange that, the world will become so much richer. And actually, we should all be extremely happy that we are alive and can contribute to that task right now.
Thank you very much.